2 minutes as long as the fog lasted and the yacht was under way, she flung up piteous hands to an uncompassionate heaven and fled to her stateroom, slamming the door as if she thought thereby to shut out the offending din. One fancied something inhumanly derisive in the prolonged hoot which replied. Rather than languish under the burden of Mr. Finuate's spirited conversation for the rest of the afternoon, Lanyard imitated Leon's example, and wasted the next hour and a half flat on his bed, with eyes closed but mind very much alive. Now and again he consulted his watch, as one might with an important appointment to keep. At 2 minutes to 4 he left his stateroom, and as the first stroke of 8 bells rang out in one of the measured intervals between blasts of the whistle ending the afternoon watch, he stepped out on deck, and paused for a survey of the weather conditions. There was no perceptible motion in the air, witnessing that the wind had come in from astern, that is to say approximately from the southeast, and was blowing at about the speed made by the yacht itself. The fog clung about the vessel, Lanyard thought, like dull grey cotton wool. Yet, if the shuddering of her fabric were fair criterion, the pace of the Sybarite was unabated. She was ploughing headlong through that dense obscurity using the utmost power of her engines. From time to time, when the whistle was still, the calls of seamen operating the sounding machine could be heard, but their reports were monotonously uniform. The waters were not yet shoal enough for the lead to find bottom at that pace. The watch was being changed as Lanyard started forward, with the tail of an eye on the bridge. Mr. Collison relieved Mr. Swain, and the latter came down the companion ladder just in time to save Lanyard a nasty spill as his feet slipped on planking greasy with globules of fog. There's no telling how bad a fall he might not have suffered had not Mr. Swain been there for him to catch at, and for a moment or two Lanyard was, as Mr. Swain put it with great good nature, all over him, clinging to the first officer in a most demonstrative manner, and it was with some difficulty that he at length recovered his equilibrium. Then, however, he laid hold of the rail for insurance against further mishaps, thanked Mr. Swain heartily, added his apologies, and the two parted with expressions of mutual esteem. The incident seemed to have dampened Lanyard's ardor for exercise. He made a rather gingerly way back to the quarterdeck, loafed restlessly in a deck chair for a little while, then went below once more. Some time after, supine again upon his bed, he heard Mr. Swain in the saloon querulously interrogating one of the stewards. It appeared that Mr. Swain had unaccountably mislaid his keys, and he wanted to know if the steward had seen anything of them. The steward hadn't, he said, and Lanyard for one knew that he spake sooth, since at that moment the missing keys were resting on the bottom of the sea several miles astern, all but one. There was no dressing for dinner that night. Léon Delorme, her nerves rasped almost beyond endurance by the relentless fog signal, preferred the seclusion of her stateroom. Lanyard wasn't really sorry. The bosom of a white shirt is calculated to make some impression upon the human retina even on the darkest night, whereas his plain lounge suit of blue serge was sure to prove entirely inconspicuous. So, if he missed the feminine influence at table, he bore up with good fortitude. and after dinner he segregated himself as usual in his favorite chair near the taffrail. The fog, if anything denser than before, manufactured an early dusk of a peculiarly depressing violet shade. Nevertheless, evenings are long in that season of the year, and to Lanyard it seemed that the twilight would never quite fade out completely, true night would never come. Long before it did, speed was slackened, the yacht was at last in soundings, the calls of the leadsman were as monotonous as the whistle blasts, and almost as frequent. Lanyard could have done without both, if the ship could not. He remarked a steadily intensified exacerbation of nerves, and told himself he was growing old, and no mistake. He could remember the time when he could have endured a strain of waiting comparable to that which he must suffer now, and have turned never a hair. How long ago it seemed! Another sign that the Sybarit had entered what are technically classified as inland waters, where special rules of the road apply, was to be remarked in the fact that the fog signal was now roaring once each minute, whereas Lanyard had grown accustomed to timing the intervals between the sounding of the ship's bell, upon which all his interest hung, at the rate of 15 blasts to the half-hour. If you asked him, once a minute seemed rather too much of a good thing, even in busy lanes of sea traffic. Still, it was better perhaps than unpremeditated disaster. One was not keen about having the Sybarit ground on a sandbank, pile up on a rock, or dash her brains out against the bulk of another vessel before 11 o'clock at earliest. In retrospect he counted those 2 hours between dinner and 10:30 longer than the fortnight which had prefaced them. So is the heart of man ever impatient when the journey's end draws near, though that end be but the beginning, as well, of that longer journey which men call death. Lest he betray his impatience by keeping the tips of his cigarette too bright, one never knows when one is not watched, he smoked sparingly. But on the 28th blare of the whistle after the ringing of 4 bells, he drew out his cigarette case and, as the 30th raved out, synchronous with 2 double strokes and a single on brazen metal, he placed a cigarette between his lips. At the same time he saw Captain Monk, who had been on the bridge with the officer of the watch for several hours, come aft with weary shoulders sagging, and go below by the saloon companionway. And Lanyard smiled knowingly and assured himself that went well see Ava BN, his star held still in the ascendant. There remained on the bridge only Mr. Collison and the man at the wheel. At the 4th blast after 5 bells Lanyard put a match to his cigarette. But he did not puff more than to get the tobacco well alight. He even held his breath, and felt his body shaken by the pulsations of his anxious heart precisely as the body of the Sybarit was shaken by the pulsations of her engines. With the next succeeding fog signal darkness absolute descended upon the vessel, shrouding it from stem to stern like a vast blanket of blackness. Mr. Mussey had not failed to keep his pact of treachery. Lanyard was out of his chair before the first call of excited remonstrance rang out on deck to be echoed in clamour. His cigarette stopped behind, on the taffrail, carefully placed at precisely the height of his head, its little glowing tip the only spot of light on the decks. No matter whether or not it were noted, no precaution is too insignificant to be important when life and death are at issue. There was nothing of that afternoon's unsureness of foot in the way Lanyard moved forward. Passing the engine room ventilators, he heard the telegraph give a single stroke. Mr. Collison had only then recovered from his astonishment sufficiently to signal to slow down. A squeal of the speaking tube whistle followed instantly, and Lanyard set foot upon the bridge in time to hear Mr. Collison demanding to know what the sanguinary had happened down there. Whatever reply he got seemed to exasperate him into incoherence. He stuttered with rage, gasped, and addressed the man at the wheel. "I've got a flash lamp in my cabin. That'll show us the compass card at least. Stand by while I run down and get it." The man mumbled an "Aye, sir." Retreating footsteps were just audible. Neither speaker had been visible to Lanyard. By putting out a hand he could have touched the helmsman, but his body made not even the shadow of a silhouette against the sky. The fog was rendering the night the simple and unqualified negation of light. And in that time of Stygian gloom violence was done swiftly, surely, and without mercy, with pity, yes, and with regret. Lanyard was sorry for the man at the wheel. But what was to be done could not be done in any other way. The surprise aided him, for the fellow offered barely a show of opposition. His astounded faculties had no more than recognized the call for resistance when he was powerless in Lanyard's hands. Swung bodily away from the wheel, he went over the rail to the forward deck like a bag of sugar. Immediately Lanyard turned to the binnacle. Sensitive fingers located the keyhole in the pedestal. The one key saved from the ring which Mr. Swain had so unfortunately and unaccountably lost opened the door. The key, of course, that Mr. Swain had used under Lanyard's eyes when demonstrating the functions of the binnacle to Leander Lorme. Thrusting a hand into the opening, Lanyard groped for the adjustable magnets in their racks, and one by one removed and dropped them to the grating at the foot of the binnacle. He worked with hands amazingly nimble and sure, and was closing and relocking the door when Mr. Collison tumbled up the ladder with his flashlight. So when the second mate arrived upon the bridge, Lanyard was waiting for him, and in consequence of a second act of deplorable violence, Mr. Collison returned to the deck backwards and lay quite still while Lanyard returned to the wheel. Collecting the abstracted magnets, he carried them to the rail, cast them into the sea and threw in the key to the little door to keep them company. Then, back at the binnacle, he unscrewed the brass caps of the cylindrical brass tube which housed the Flinders bar, removed that also, replaced the caps, and consigned the bar to the sea in its turn. By choice he would have made a good job of it and abolished the quadrantal correctors as well, but he judged he had done mischief enough to secure his ends, as it was. The compass ought now to be just as constant to the magnetic pole as a hummingbird to one especial rose. Guiding himself by a hand that lightly touched the rail, Lanyard regained his chair, carefully composing himself in the position in which he had been resting when the lights went out. His cigarette was still aglow. Good Turkish has this virtue among many others, that left to itself it will burn on to the end of its roll. The next instant, however, he was on his feet again. A beam of light had swept across the saloon skylight, coming from below, the beam of a portable electric torch. It might have been the signal for the first piercing scream of Leander Lorme. A pistol shot with a vicious accent cut short the scream. After a brief pause, several more shots rippled in the saloon. A man shouted angrily. Then the torchlight found and steadied upon the mouth of the companionway. Against that glare, a burly figure was instantaneously relieved, running up to the deck. As it gained the topmost step, a final report sounded in the saloon, and the figure checked, revolved slowly on a heel, tottered, and plunged head foremost down the steps again. A moment later, incredible that the stipulated 10 minutes should have passed so swiftly, the lights came on, and with a still fuming stump of cigarette between his fingers, Lanyard went below. His bewildered gaze discovered first Leander Lorme, drawn up rigidly. She seemed for some reason to be standing tiptoe against the starboard partition, near her stateroom door. Her fingers were clawing her cheeks, her eyes widely dilate with horror and fright, her mouth was agape, and from it issued, as by some mechanical impulse, shriek upon hollow shriek, cries wholly flat and meaningless, having no character of any sort, mere automatic reflexes of hysteria. On the opposite side of the saloon, not far from the door to his own quarters, Monk lay semi-prone with a purple face and protruding eyeballs, far gone toward death through strangulation. Finuit, on his knees, was removing a silk handkerchief that had been twisted about that scrawny throat. At the foot of the companionway steps, Popinot, no phantom but the veritable Apache himself, was writhing and heaving convulsively, and even as Lanyard looked, the huge body of the creature lifted from the floor in one last, heroic spasm, then collapsed, and moved no more. Viewing this hideous tableau, appreciating what it meant that Popinot, forearmed with advice from a trusted quarter, had stationed himself outside the door to Monk's stateroom, to waylay and garrote the man whom he expected to emerge therefrom laden with the plunder of Monk's safe, Lanyard appreciated further that he had done Mr. Mussey a great wrong. For he had all the time believed that the chief engineer was laying a trap for him on behalf of his ancient shipmate, that unhappy victim of groundless jealousy, Captain Whittaker Monk. XXAECAVABN. Fearful lest, left to herself, Leander Lorme would do an injury to his eardrums as well as to her own vocal cords, Lanyard stepped across the dead bulk of the Apache and planted himself squarely in front of the woman. Seizing her forearms with his two hands, he used force to drag them down to the level of her waist, and purposely made his grasp so strong that his fingers sank deep into the soft flesh. At the same time, staring fixedly into her vacant eyes, he smiled his most winning smile, but with the muscles of his mouth alone, and said quietly, "Shut up, Leon. Stop making a fool of yourself. Shut up, do you hear?" The incongruity of his brutal grasp with his smile, added to the incongruity of an ordinary conversational tone with his peremptory and savage phrases, had the expected effect. Sanity began to inform the violet eyes, a shrill, empty scream was cut sharply in two. The woman stared for an instant with a look of confusion. Then her lashes drooped, her body relaxed. She fell limply against the partition and was quiet save for fits of trembling that shook her body from head to foot. Still, each successive seizure was sensibly less severe. Lanyard let go her wrists. "There," he said, "that's over, Leon. The beast is done for, no more to fear from him. Now forget him, brace up, and realize the debt you owe good Monsieur Finuit." With a grin, that gentleman looked up from his efforts to revive Captain Monk. "I'm a shy, retiring violet," he stated somewhat superfluously, "but if the world will kindly lend its ears, I'll inform it coyly that was some shootin'. Have a look, will you, Lanyard, like a good fellow, and make sure our little friend over there isn't playing possum on us. Seems to me I've heard of his doing something like that before, maybe you remember. And, mademoiselle, if you'll be kind enough to fetch me that carafe of ice water, I'll see if we can't bring the skipper to his senses, such as they are." His tone was sufficiently urgent to rouse Leon out of the lassitude into which reaction from terror had let her slip. She passed a hand over still dazed eyes, looked uncertainly about, then with perceptible exertion of willpower collected herself, stood away from the partition and picked up the carafe. Lanyard adopted the sensible suggestion of Finuit, dropping on a knee to rest his hand above the heart of Popinot. To his complete satisfaction, if not at all to his surprise, no least flutter of life was to be detected in that barrel-like chest. A moment longer he lingered, looking the corpse over with inquisitive eyes. No sign that he could see suggested that Popinot had suffered hardship during his 2 weeks of close sequestration. He seemed to have fared well as to food and drink, and his clothing, if nothing to boast of in respect of cut or cloth, and though wrinkled and stretched with constant wear, was tolerably clean, unstained by bilge, grease, or coal smuts, as it must have been had the man been hiding in the hold or bunkers, those traditional refuges of your Simon Pure stowaway. No, Monsieur Popinot had been well taken care of, and Lanyard could name an officer of prestige ponderable enough to secure his quarters, wherein presumably Popinot had lain perdue, against search when the yacht has been turned inside out according to its commander. So this was the source of Mr. Muss's exact understanding of the business. As to the question of how the apache had been smuggled aboard, and when, Lanyard never learned the truth. Circumstances were to prevent his interrogating Mr. Mussy, and he could only assume that since Popinot could hardly have been in the motor car wrecked on the road from Paris, he must have left that pursuit to trusted confrères, and, anticipating their possible failure, have hurried on to Cherbourg by another route to make precautionary arrangements with Mr. Mussy. Ah, well. No fault could be found with the fellow for lack of determination and tenacity. On the point of rising, Lanyard reconsidered and, bending over the body, ran clever hands rapidly through the clothing, turning out every pocket and heaping the miscellany of rubbish thus brought to light upon the floor. With a single exception, Popinot had possessed a pistol, an excellent automatic. Why he hadn't used it to protect himself, heaven only knew. Presumably he had been too thoroughly engrossed in the exercise of his favorite sport to think of the weapon up to the time when Finuit had opened fire on him, and then, thrown into panic, he had been able to entertain one thought only, that of escape. Lanyard entertained for a moment a vivid imaginary picture of the scene in the saloon when Finuit had surprised the apache in the act of strangling Monk, a picture that Finuit subsequently confirmed substantially in every detail. One saw the garroter creeping through the blackness of the saloon from his hiding place, forward in the cabin of the chief engineer, stationing himself at the door to Monk's quarters, with his chosen weapon, that deadly handkerchief of his trade, ready for the throat of the lone wolf when he should emerge, in accordance with his agreement with Mr. Mussey, the spoils of the captain's safe in his hands. Then one saw Monk, alarmed by the sudden failure of the lights, hurrying out to return to the bridge, the pantherish spring upon the victim's back, the swift, dexterous noosing of the handkerchief about his windpipe, the merciless tightening of it all abruptly illuminated by the white glare of Finuit's electric torch. And then the truncated crimson of the first pistol flash, the frantic effort to escape, the hunting of that gross shape of flesh by the beam of light, and the bullets as Popinot doubled and twisted round the saloon like a rat in a pit, the last mad plunge for the companionway, the flight up its steps that had by the narrowest margin failed to save him. Finuit and Léon Delorme were too busy to heed. Quietly Lanyard slipped the pistol into a pocket and got to his feet. Then Swain came charging down the steps to find out what all the row was about, and to report which he did as soon as Monk was sufficiently recovered to understand those outrageous and darkly mysterious assaults upon the helmsman and Mr. Collisson. Both men, he stated, were unfit for further duty that night, though neither, Lanyard was happy to learn, had suffered any permanent injury. But what in the name of insanity could have inspired such a meaningless atrocity? What could its perpetrator have hoped to gain? What? Monk, stretched out upon a leather couch in his sitting room, leveled eyebrows of suspicion at Lanyard, who countered with a guilelessness so perfect as to make it appear that he did not even comprehend the insinuation. "If I may offer a suggestion," he said with becoming diffidence. "Well?" Monk demanded with a snap, despite his languors. "What's on your mind?" It would seem to a benevolent neutral like myself. You understand, I was in my deck chair by the taffrail throughout all this affair. The men at the sounding machine nearby can tell you I did not move before the shots in the saloon. How the devil could they know that in the dark? I was smoking, monsieur. They must, if they looked, have seen the fire of my cigarette. As I was about to suggest, it would seem to me that there must be some obscure but not necessarily unfathomable connection between the three events, else how should they synchronize so perfectly? How did Popinot know the lights would go out a few minutes after 5 bells? He was prepared, he lost no time. How did the other miscreant, whoever he was, know it would be safe to commit that wickedness, whatever its purpose, upon the bridge at precisely that time? For plainly he, too, was prepared to act upon the instant, that is, if I understand Mr. Swain's report correctly. And how did it happen that the dynamo went out of commission just then? What did happen in the engine room? Does anybody know? I think, messieurs, if you find out the answer to that last question, you will have gone some way toward solving your mystery. Captain Monk addressed Mr. Swain curtly. It's the chief's watch in the engine room. Yes, sir. I'll have a talk with him presently, and go further into this affair. In the meantime, how does she stand? Under steerage way only. Mr. Swain consulted the telltale compass affixed to the deck beam overhead. West by south, sir. Must have swung off during that cursed dark spell. When I came below, 2 or 3 minutes before, we were heading into the race, west-northwest, having left Cerberus Shoal Whistling Boy to port about 15 minutes earlier. Get her back on that course, if you please, Mr. Swain, and proceed at half speed. Don't neglect your soundings. I'll join you as soon as I feel fit. Very good, sir. Mr. Swain withdrew. Captain Monk let his head sink back on its pillows and shut his eyes. Léon Delorme solicitously stroked his forehead. The captain opened his eyes long enough to register adoration with the able assistance of the eyebrows. Léon smiled down upon him divinely. Lanyard thought that affection was a beautiful thing, but preserved a duly concerned countenance. I could do with a whiskey and soda, Monk confessed feebly. No, not you, please, as Léon offered to withdraw the compassionate hand. Finn isn't busy. Mr. Finuit hastened to make himself useful. A muted echo of the engine room telegraph was audible then, and the engines took up again their tireless chant. Lanyard cocked a sly eye at the telltale. It designated their course as west by north, a quarter west. He was cheered to think that his labors at the binnacle were bearing fruit, and grateful that Monk was so busy being an invalid waited upon and pitied by a beautiful volunteer nurse that he was willing to trust the navigation to Mr. Swain, and had no time to observe by the telltale whether or not the course he had prescribed was being followed. Léon's exquisite and tender arm supported the suffering head of Captain Monk as he absorbed the nourishment served by Finuit. The eyebrows made an affectingly faint try at a gesture of gratitude. The eyes closed. Once more Monk's head reposed upon the pillow. He sighed like a weary child. From the saloon came sounds of shuffling feet and mumbling voices as seamen carried away all that was mortal of Monsieur Popinot. Between roars of the fog signal, 6 bells vibrated on the air. Finuit cocked his head intelligently to one side, ransacked his memory, and looked brightly to Lanyard. "Aha," he murmured, "the fatal hour." Lanyard gave him a gracious smile. In attenuated accents Captain Monk, without opening his eyes or stirring under the caresses of that lovely hand, enquired, "What say, Finn?" "I was just reminding Monsieur Lanyard the fatal hour has struck, old thing." The eyebrows knitted in painful effort to understand. When one has narrowly escaped death by strangulation, one may be pardoned some slight mental haziness. Besides, it makes to retain sympathy, not to be too confoundedly clear-headed. Fatal hour. The dear man promised to turn in his answer to our unselfish little proposition at 6 bells tonight and not later. Really? The voice was interested, and so were the eyebrows, but Monk was at pains not to move. And has he? Not yet, old egg. Monk opened expectant eyes and fixed them upon Lanyard's face, the eyebrows acquiring a slant of amiable enquiry. There is much to be said, Lanyard temporized. That is, if you feel strong enough. Oh, quite, Monk assured him in tones barely audible. Must it be a blow to the poor dear? Finuit enquired. I hope not, very truly. The telltale now betrayed a course northwest by north. Had the binnacle compass, then, gone out of its head altogether, on finding itself bereft of its accustomed court of counter-attractions? Well, here we all are, sitting forward on the edges of our chairs, holding on to the seats with both hands, ears pricked forward, eyes shining. The suspense, Finuit avowed, is something fierce. I am sorry. What do you mean, you're sorry? You're not going to back out? Having never walked into the arrangement you propose, it would be difficult to back out, would it not? Monk forgot that he was suffering acutely, forgot even the beautiful and precious hand that was soothing his fevered brow, and rudely shaking it off, sat up suddenly. The eyebrows were distinctly minatory above eyes that loosed ugly gleams. You refuse? Lanyard slowly inclined his head. I regret I must beg to be excused. You damned fool. Pardon, monsieur. A look of fury convulsed Léon's face. Finuit, too, was glaring, no longer a humorist. Monk's mouth was working, and his eyebrows had got out of hand altogether. I said you were a damned fool, but is not that a matter of personal viewpoint? At least, the question would seem to be open to debate. If you think arguments will satisfy us. But, my dear Captain Monk, I am really not at all concerned to satisfy you. However, if you wish to know my reasons for declining the honor you would thrust upon me, they are at your service. I'll be glad to hear them, said Monk grimly. One, I fancy, will do as well as a dozen. It is, then, my considered judgment that, were I in the least inclined to resume the evil ways of my past, as I am not, I would be, as you so vividly put it, a damned fool to associate myself with people of a low grade of intelligence, wanting even enough to hold fast that which they have thieved. By God! Monk brought down a thumping fist. What are you getting at? Your hopeless inefficiency, monsieur. Forgive my bluntness. Come through, Finuit advised in a dangerous voice. Just what do you mean? I mean that you, knowing I have but one object in submitting to association with you in any way, to wit, the recovery of the jewels of Madame de Montalis and their restoration to that lady, have not had sufficient wit to prevent my securing those jewels under your very noses. You mean to say you've stolen them? Lanyard nodded. They are at present in my possession, if that confesses an act of theft. Monk laughed discordantly. Then I say you're a liar, Monsieur the Lone Wolf, as well as a fool. His fist smote the desk again. The Montalis jewels are here. Lanyard shrugged. When did you lift them? Finuit demanded with sarcasm. Tell us that. Lanyard smiled an exasperating smile, lounged low in his chair, and looked at the deck beams, taking occasion to note that the telltale had swung to true northwest. See Ava BN. Why, you insane impostor! Monk stormed. I had that box in my own hands no later than this afternoon. Without moving, Lanyard directed his voice toward the ceiling. Did you by any chance open it and see what was inside? There was no answer, and though he was careful not to betray any interest by watching them, he was well aware that looks of alarm and suspicion were being exchanged by those three. So much for enjoying the prestige of a stupendously successful criminal past. A single thought was in the mind of Leander Lorme, Captain Monk, and Mr. Finuit. With the Lone Wolf, nothing was impossible. Leander Lorme said abruptly, in a choking voice, "Open the safe, please, Captain Monk." "I'll do nothing of the sort." "Go on," Finuit advised. "Make sure. If it's true, we get them back, don't we? If it isn't, we show him up for a pitiful bluff." "It's a dodge," Monk declared, "to get the jewels where he can lay hands on them. The safe stays shut." "Open it, I beg you," Leon implored in tremulous accents. "No, why not?" Finuit argued. "What can he do? I've got him covered." "And I," Lanyard interjected softly, "as you all know, am unarmed." "Please?" Leon insisted. There was a pause which ended in a sullen grunt from Monk. Lanyard smiled cheerfully and sat up in his chair, watching the captain while he unlocked the door in the pedestal and with shaking fingers manipulated the combination dial. Leander Lorme left her chair to stand nearby, in undissembled anxiety. Only Finuit remained as he had been, lounging back and watching Lanyard narrowly, his automatic pistol dangling between his knees. Lanyard offered him a pleasant smile. Finuit scowled forbiddingly in response. Monk swung open the safe door, seized the metal dispatch box by the handle, and set it upon the desk with a bang. Then, extracting his pocket key ring, he selected the proper key and made several attempts to insert it in the slot of the lock. But his confidence was so shaken, his morale so impaired by Lanyard's sublime effrontery added to his recent shocking experience, that the gaunt hands trembled beyond his control, and it was several seconds before he succeeded. Lanyard gave no sign, but his heart sank. He had exhausted his last resource to gain time. He was now at his wits' ends. Only his star could save him now. Monk turned the keys, but all at once forgot his purpose, and with hands stayed upon the lid of the box paused and cocked his ears attentively to rumors of excitement and confusion on the deck. The instinct of the seafaring man uppermost, Monk stiffened, grew rigid from head to foot. One heard hurried feet, outcries, a sudden jangle of the engine room telegraph, Monsieur! Monsieur! Leon implored. Open that box. The words were on her lips when she was thrown off her feet by a frightful shock which stopped the Sybarite dead in full career, before the screw, reversed in obedience to the telegraph, could grip the water and lessen her momentum. The woman cannoned against Monk, shouldering him bodily aside. Instinctively snatching at the box, Monk succeeded only in dragging it to the edge of the desk before a second shock, accompanied by a grinding crash of steel and timbers, seemed to make the yacht leap like a live thing stricken mortally. She heeled heavily to starboard. The dispatch box went to the floor with a thump lost in the greater din. Leon Delorme was propelled headlong into a corner, Monk thrown to his knees, Finuit lifted out of his chair and flung sprawling into the arms of Lanyard, who, pinned down by the other's weight in his own chair, felt this last slide backwards to starboard and bring up against a partition with a bang that drove the breath out of him in one enormous gust. He retained, however, sufficient presence of mind neatly to disarm Finuit before that one guessed what he was about. After that second blow, the Sybarite remained at a standstill, but the continued beating of her engines caused her to quiver painfully from trucks to keelson, as if in agonies of death such as those which had marked the end of Popinot. Of a sudden the engines ceased, and there was no more movement of any sort, only an appalling repose with silence more dreadful still. Lanyard had no means to measure how long that dumb suspense lasted which was imposed by the stunned faculties of all on board. It seemed interminable. Eventually he saw Monk pick himself up and, making strange moaning noises, like a wounded animal, throw himself upon the door, jerk it open, and dash out. As if he had only needed that vision of action to animate him, Lanyard threw Finuit off, so that he staggered across the slanting floor toward the door. When he brought himself up by catching hold of its frame, he was under the threat of his own pistol in Lanyard's hands. He lingered for a moment, showing Lanyard a distraught and vacant face, then apparently realizing his danger faded away into the saloon. With a roughness dictated by the desperate extremity, Lanyard strode over to Leon Delorme, where she still crouched in her corner, staring witlessly, caught her by one arm, fairly jerked her to her feet, and thrust her stumbling out into the saloon. Closing the door behind her, he shot its bolts. He went to work swiftly then, in a fever of haste. In his ears the clamor of the shipwrecked men upon the decks was only a distant droning, hardly recognized for what it was by him who had not one thought other than to make all possible advantage of every precious instant, and so with the roar of steam from the escape valves. Stripping off coat and waistcoat, he took from the pocket of the latter the wallet that held his papers, then ripped open his shirt and unbuckled the money belt round his waist. Its pockets were ample and fitted with trustworthy fastenings, and all but one, that held a few English sovereigns, were empty. The jewels of Madame de Montalis went into them as rapidly as his fingers could move. Thus engaged, he heard a pistol explode in the saloon, and saw the polished writing bed of the captain's desk scored by a bullet. His gaze shifting to the door, he discovered a neat round hole in one of its rosewood panels. At the same time, to the tune of another report, a second hole appeared, and the bullet, winging above the desk, buried itself in the after bulkhead, between the deadlights. A stream of bullets followed, one after another boring the stout panels as if their consistency had been that of cheese. Lanyard stepped out of their path and hugged the partition while he finished stuffing the jewels into the belt and, placing the thin wallet beneath it, strapped it tightly round him once more. That would be Finuit out there, no doubt, disdaining to waste time breaking in the door, or perhaps fearing his reception once it was down. An innocent and harmless amusement, if he enjoyed it, that it seemed a pity to interrupt. At the same time it grew annoying. The door was taking on the look of a sieve, and the neighborhood of the deadlights, Lanyard's sole avenue of escape, was being well peppered. Something would have to be done about it. Lanyard completed his preparations by kicking off his shoes and taking up another notch in the belt that supported his trousers. If the swim before him proved a long one, he could get rid of his garments in the water readily enough. If on the other hand the shore proved to be close at hand, it would be more convenable to land at least half-clothed. Then the fusillade continuing without intermission save when the man outside stopped long enough to extract an empty clip and replace it with one loaded. Lanyard edged along the partition to the door, calculated the stand of the lunatic in the saloon from the angle at which the bullets were coming through, and emptied the pistol he had taken from Finuit at the panels as fast as he could pull trigger. There was no more firing. He tossed aside the empty weapon, made sure of Popenots on his hip, approached one of the deadlights, placed a chair, climbed upon it, and with infinite pains managed to wriggle and squirm head and shoulders through the opening. It was very fortunate for him indeed that the Sybarite happened to have been built for pleasure yachting, with deadlights uncommonly large for the sake of air and light, else he would have been obliged to run the risk of opening the door to the saloon and fighting his way out and up to the deck. As it was, the business was difficult enough. He had to work one of his arms out after his shoulders and then, twisting round, strain and claw at the smooth overhang of the stern until able to catch the outer lip of the scuppers above. After that he had to lift and drag the rest of him out through the deadlight and, hanging by fingertips, work his way round, inch by inch, until it seemed possible to drop into the sea and escape hitting the screw. In point of fact, he barely missed splitting himself in two on the thing, and on coming to the surface clung to it while taking such observations as one might in that befogged blackness. Impossible to guess which way to strike out. The fog hung low upon the water, greying its smooth, gently heaving black surface. He could see nothing on either beam. At length, however, he heard through the hissing uproar of escaping steam a mournful bell somewhere off to port, which he at first took for a buoy, then perceived to be tolling with a regularity inconsistent with the eccentric action of waves. Timed by pulse beats, it struck once every 15 seconds or thereabouts, undoubtedly the fog signal of some minor lighthouse. In confirmation of this conclusion, Lanyard heard, from the deck above, the resonant accents of Captain Monk, clearly articulate in that riot of voices, apparently storming at hapless Mr. Swain. "Don't you hear that bell, you ass? Doesn't that tell you what you've done? You've piled us on the rocks off the eastern end of Plum Island. And God in heaven only knows how you managed to get so far off the course." Breathing to the night air thanks which would have driven Captain Monk mad could he have heard them, Lanyard let go the bronze blade and struck out for the melancholy bell. 10 minutes later the fingers of one hand he was swimming on his side at the bottom of its stroke touched pebbles. He lowered his feet and waded through extensive shallows to a wide and sandy beach. Xxate finale. The window of the living room in his suite at the Walpole, set high in cliff-like walls, commanded a southward vista of Fifth Avenue whose enchantment, clothed in ever-changing guises of light and shade, was so potent that Lanyard, on the first day of his tenancy, thought it could never tire. Yet by noon of the third he was viewing it with the eyes of soul-destroying ennui, though the disfavor it had so quickly won in his sight was, he knew, due less to cloying familiarity than to the uncertainty and discontent that were eating out his heart. 3 days before, immediately on arriving in New York and installing himself in this hotel, to whose management he was well known from other days, he had cabled Eve de Montalis and Worthy Immer. The response to the latter, a cheerful request that credit be arranged for him by cable, was as prompt and satisfactory as he had expected it to be. But from Madame de Montalis he heard nothing. Mission successful, he had wired returning France by La Savoie in 5 days, having arranged safe transportation. Your property, please advise if you can meet me in Paris to receive same or your commands otherwise. And to this, silence only, silence to him to whom words of her dictation, however few and terse and filtered through no matter how many indifferent mediums of intelligence, would have been precious beyond expression. So it was that, as hour followed hour and the tale of them lengthened into days, he fell into a temper of morbid brooding that was little like the man. And instead of faring abroad and seeking what amusement he might find in the most carefree city of the post-war world, shut himself up in his rooms and moped, indifferent to all things but the knocks at his door, the stridulation of the telephone bell that might announce the arrival of the desired message. And so it was that, when the telephone did ring at last, towards noon of that third day, he fairly stumbled over himself in his haste to reach the instrument. But the animation with which he answered the professional voice at the other end of the wire faded very quickly, the look of weariness returned, his accents voiced an indifference fairly desolating. "Yes, oh, yes, very well, yes. At once." He returned to his view from the window, and was hating it with all his heart when a stout knuckling on his door announced his callers. They filed into the room with a cheerfulness of mien in striking contrast to the weary courtesy with which Lanyard received them, Léon Delorme first, then Monk, then Finuit, rather bleached of color and wearing one arm in a sling, all very smart in clothes conspicuously new and as costly as the avenue afforded, striking figures of contentment in prosperity. "It is a pleasure indeed," Lanyard gravely acknowledged their several salutations, not, I must confess, altogether unexpected, but a pleasure none the less. "So you didn't think we'd be long spotting you in the good little old town?" Finuit enquired. Had a notion you thought the best way to lose us would be to put up at this well-known home of the highest prices. No, Lanyard replied. I never thought to be rid of you without one more meeting. Then there's good in the old bean yet, Finuit interrupted in wasted irony. One cherishes that hope, monsieur, but the trail I left for you to follow. I would be an ass indeed if I thought you would fail to find it. When one borrows a rowboat at Plum Island Light without asking permission, government property, too, and leaves it moored to a dock on the Greenport waterfront, when one arrives in Greenport clothed in shirt and trousers only, and has to bribe its pardonably suspicious inhabitants with handfuls of British gold which they are the more loath to accept in view of its present depreciation, in order to secure a slopshist coat and shoes and transportation by railway to New York, when a taxicab chauffeur refuses a sovereign for his fare from the Pennsylvania station to this hotel, and one is constrained to borrow from the management. Why, I should say the trail was fairly broad and well blazed, Miss Amos. Be that as it may, said Finuit, here in a manner of speaking we all are, at least, the happy family reunited and ready to talk business. And no hard feelings, Monsieur Finuit. There will be none. Monk's eyebrows were at once sardonic and self-satisfied, which speaks volumes for their versatility. At least, none on our side when we are finished. That makes me more happy still. And you, Leon? The woman gave a negligent movement of pretty shoulders. One begins to see how very right you are, Michael, she said wearily, and always were, for that matter. If one wishes to do wrong, one should do it all alone, and escape being bored to death by the unpardonable stupidity of associates. But no, messieurs, she insisted with temper, as Monk and Finuit simultaneously flew signals of resentment. I mean what I say. I wish I had never seen any of you. I am sick of you all. What did I tell you when you insisted on coming here to see Monsieur Lanyard? That you would gain nothing and perhaps lose much. But you would not listen to me. You found it impossible to believe there could be in all the world a man who keeps his word, not only to others but to himself. You are so lost in admiration of your own cleverness in backing that poor little ship off the rocks and letting her fill and sink, so that there could be no evidence of wrongdoing against you, that you must try to prove your wits once more where they have always failed, she illustrated with a dramatic gesture against his. You say to yourselves, since we are wrong, he must be wrong, and since that is now clearly proved, that he is as wrong in every way as we, then it follows naturally that he will heed our threats and surrender to us those jewels, she declared bitterly, which we would have been fortunate never to have heard of. She threw herself back in her chair and showed them a scornful shoulder, compressing indignant lips to a straight, unlovely line, and beating out the devil's tattoo with her slipper. Lanyard watched her with a puzzled smile. How much of this was acting? How much, if anything, an expression of true feeling? Was she actually persuaded it was waste of time to contend against him? Or was she shrewdly playing upon his not unfriendly disposition toward her in the hope that it would spare her in the hour of the grand debacle? He could be sure of one thing only: since she was a woman, he would never know. Monk had been making ominous motions with the eyebrows, but Finuit made haste to be beforehand with him. "You said one thing, mademoiselle, one thing anyway that meant something, that Monsieur Lanyard would give up those jewels to us. That's all arranged." Lanyard turned to him with genuine amusement. "Indeed, monsieur. Indeed, and everything. We don't want to pull any rough stuff on you, Lanyard, and we won't unless you force us to rough stuff, monsieur." "You mean, physical force?" "Not exactly. But I think you'll recall my telling you I stand in well with the police department in the old hometown. Maybe you thought that was swank. Likely you did. But it wasn't. I've got a couple of friends of mine from headquarters waiting downstairs this very minute, ready and willing to cop out the honor of putting the lone wolf under arrest for stealing the Montalis jewels." "But is it possible?" Lanyard protested. "You still do not understand me. Is it possible you still believe I am a thief at heart and interested in those jewels only to turn them to my own profit?" He stared unbelievingly at the frosty eyes of Monk beneath their fatuously stubborn brows, at the hard, unyielding eyes of Finuit. "You said it," this last replied with brevity. "It was a good bluff while it lasted, Monsieur Lanyard," Monk added, "but it couldn't last forever. You can't get away with it. Why not give in gracefully, admit you're licked for once, be a good fellow?" "My God!" Lanyard pronounced in comic despair, "it passes understanding." "It is true, then, and true especially of such as you are today, as I was in my yesterday, that whom fortune wishes to destroy she first makes mad. For, I give you my word of honor, you seem to me quite mad, messieurs, too mad to be allowed at large. And in proof of my sincerity, I propose that you shall not longer remain at large." "What's that?" Monk demanded, startled. "Why, you have not hesitated to threaten me with the police. So now I, in my turn, have the honor to inform you that, anticipating this call, I have had relays of detectives waiting in this hotel day and night, with instructions to guard the doors as soon as you were shown up to my rooms. Be advised, Mr. Finuit, and forget your pistol. Even to show it in this city would make matters infinitely worse for you than they are." "He's lying," Monk insisted, putting a restraining hand on Finuit's arm as that one started from his chair in rage and panic. "He wouldn't dare." "Would I not? Then, since you believe nothing till it is proved to you, messieurs, permit me." Lanyard crossed rapidly to the hall door and flung it open and fell back a pace with a cry of amazement. At the threshold stood, not the detective whom he had expected to see, but a woman with a cable message form in one hand, the other lifted to knock. "Madame!" Lanyard gasped. "Madame de Montalis!" The cable form fluttered to the floor as she entered with a gladness in her face that was carried out by the impulsive gesture with which she gave him her hands. "My dear friend, she cried happily. I am so glad. And to think we have been guests of the same hotel for 3 livelong days and never knew it. I arrived by La Touraine Saturday, but your message, telegraphed back from Coombe Redonde, reached me not 5 minutes ago. I telephoned the desk, they told me the number of your room and here I am. But I cannot believe my senses. With unanimous consent Jules, Finuit and Monk uprose and made for the door, only to find it blocked by the substantial form of a plain citizen with his hands in his pockets and understanding in his eyes. Steady, gents, he counseled coolly. Orders are to let everybody in and nobody out without Mr. Lanyard says so. For a moment they hung in doubt and consternation, consulting one another with dismayed stares. Then Finuit made as if to shoulder the man aside. But for the sake of the moral effect the latter casually exhibited a pistol, and the moral effect of that was stupendous. Mr. Finuit disconsolately slouched back into the room. Grasping the situation, Yves de Montalis turned to the quartet, eyes that glimmered in a face otherwise quite composed. But how surprising, she declared. Madame la Comtesse de Lorne's Monsieur Monk. Mr. Finuit, how delightful to see you all again. The civility met with inadequate appreciation. Nothing could be more opportune, Lanyard declared, for it is to this lady, Madame de Montalis, and to these gentlemen that you owe the recovery of your jewels. Truly. As I am telling you. But for them, their charming hospitality in inviting me to cruise aboard their yacht, but for the assistance they lent me, though sometimes unconsciously, I admit I should never have been able to say to you today, your jewels are in a safe place, madam, immediately at your disposal. But how can I thank them? Well, said Lanyard, if you ask me, I think we have detained them long enough. I believe they would be most grateful to be permitted to leave and keep their numerous and pressing appointments elsewhere. I am entirely of your mind, monsieur. Lanyard nodded to the man in the doorway. All right, Mr. Murray and he stood indifferently aside. In silence the 3 men moved to the door and out, Finuit with a brazen swagger, Jules without emotion visible, Monk with eyebrows adroop and flapping. But Lanyard interposed when Léon Delorme would have followed. A moment, Léon, if you will be so good. She paused, regarding him with a sombre and inscrutable face while he produced from his coat pocket a fat envelope without endorsement. This is yours. The woman murmured blankly, mine. He said in a guarded voice, papers I found in the safe in your library, that night. I had to take them for use in event of need. Now, they are useless. But you are unwise to keep such papers, Léon. Goodbye. The envelope was unsealed. Lifting the flap, the woman half withdrew the enclosure, recognized it at a glance, and crushed it in a convulsive grasp, while the blood, ebbing swiftly from her face, threw her rouge into livid relief. For an instant she seemed about to speak, then bowed her head in dumb acknowledgement, and left the room. Lanyard nodded to Mr. Murray, who amiably closed the door, keeping himself on the outside of it. Eve de Montalis was eyeing him with an indulgent and amused glance. As he turned to her, she shook her head slowly in mockery of reproof. "That woman loves you, monsieur," she stated quietly. He succeeded admirably in looking as if the thought was strange to him. "One is sure Madame must be mistaken." "Ah, but I am not," said Eve de Montalis. "Who should know better the signs that tell of woman's love for you, my dear?" The end. End of the Project Gutenberg ebook Alias The Lone Wolf Updated editions will replace the previous one, the old editions will be renamed. Creating the works from print editions not protected by U.S. copyright law means that no one owns a United States copyright in these works, so the Foundation, and you, can copy and distribute it in the United States without permission and without paying copyright royalties. Special rules, set forth in the general terms of use part of this license, apply to copying and distributing Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol concept and trademark. Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark, and may not be used if you charge for an ebook, except by following the terms of the trademark license, including paying royalties for use of the Project Gutenberg trademark. If you do not charge anything for copies of this ebook, complying with the trademark license is very easy. You may use this ebook for nearly any purpose such as creation of derivative works, reports, performances and research. Project Gutenberg ebooks may be modified and printed and given away. You may do practically anything in the United States with ebooks not protected by U.S. copyright law. Redistribution is subject to the trademark license, especially commercial redistribution. Start. Full license. The full Project Gutenberg license. Please read this before you distribute or use this work to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol mission of promoting the free distribution of electronic works, by using or distributing this work, or any other work associated in any way with the phrase Project Gutenberg. You agree to comply with all the terms of the full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license available with this file or online at www.gutenberg.org/license. Section 1. General Terms of Use and Redistributing Project Gutenberg Trademark Symbol Electronic Works 1.0. By reading or using any part of this Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work, you indicate that you have read, understand, agree to and accept all the terms of this license and intellectual property, trademark/copyright, agreement. If you do not agree to abide by all the terms of this agreement, you must cease using and return or destroy all copies of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works in your possession. If you paid a fee for obtaining a copy of or access to a Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work and you do not agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement, you may obtain a refund from the person or entity to whom you paid the fee as set forth in paragraph 1.e.8. 1.b Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark. It may only be used on or associated in any way with an electronic work by people who agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement. There are a few things that you can do with most Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works even without complying with the full terms of this agreement. See paragraph 1.c below. There are a lot of things you can do with Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works if you follow the terms of this agreement and help preserve free future access to Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works. See paragraph 1.e below. 1.c. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the Foundation or PGLAF, owns a compilation copyright in the collection of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works. Nearly all the individual works in the collection are in the public domain in the United States. If an individual work is unprotected by copyright law in the United States and you are located in the United States, we do not claim a right to prevent you from copying, distributing, performing, displaying or creating derivative works based on the work as long as all references to Project Gutenberg are removed. Of course, we hope that you will support the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol mission of promoting free access to electronic works by freely sharing Project Gutenberg trademark symbol works in compliance with the terms of this agreement for keeping the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol name associated with the work. You can easily comply with the terms of this agreement by keeping this work in the same format with its attached full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license when you share it without charge with others. 1.d. The copyright laws of the place where you are located also govern what you can do with this work. Copyright laws in most countries are in a constant state of change. If you are outside the United States, check the laws of your country in addition to the terms of this agreement before downloading, copying, displaying, performing, distributing or creating derivative works based on this work or any other Project Gutenberg trademark symbol work. The Foundation makes no representations concerning the copyright status of any work in any country other than the United States. 1.e Unless you have removed all references to Project Gutenberg, 1.e.1. The following sentence, with active links to, or other immediate access to, the full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license must appear prominently whenever any copy of a Project Gutenberg trademark symbol work, any work on which the phrase Project Gutenberg appears, or with which the phrase Project Gutenberg is associated, is accessed, displayed, performed, viewed, copied or distributed. This ebook is for the use of anyone anywhere in the United States and most other parts of the world at no cost and with almost no restrictions whatsoever. You may copy it, give it away or reuse it under the terms of the Project Gutenberg license included with this ebook or online at www.gutenberg.org. If you are not located in the United States, you will have to check the laws of the country where you are located before using this ebook. 1.e.2 If an individual Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work is derived from texts not protected by U.S. copyright law, does not contain a notice indicating that it is posted with permission of the copyright holder, the work can be copied and distributed to anyone in the United States without paying any fees or charges. If you are redistributing or providing access to a work with the phrase Project Gutenberg associated with or appearing on the work, you must comply either with the requirements of paragraphs 1.e.1 through 1.e.7 or obtain permission for the use of the work and the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol trademark as set forth in paragraphs 1.e.8 or 1.e.9. 1.e.3. If an individual Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work is posted with the permission of the copyright holder, your use and distribution must comply with both paragraphs 1.e.1 through 1.e.7 and any additional terms imposed by the copyright holder. Additional terms will be linked to the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license for all works posted with the permission of the copyright holder found at the beginning of this work. 1.e.4. Do not unlink or detach or remove the full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license terms from this work, or any files containing a part of this work or any other work associated with Project Gutenberg trademark symbol. 1.e.5. Do not copy, display, perform, distribute or redistribute this electronic work, or any part of this electronic work, without prominently displaying the sentence set forth in paragraph 1.e.1 with active links or immediate access to the full terms of the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license. 1.e.6. You may convert to and distribute this work in any binary, compressed, marked up, non-proprietary or proprietary form, including any word processing or hypertext form. However, if you provide access to or distribute copies of a Project Gutenberg trademark symbol work in a format other than plain vanilla ASCII or other format used in the official version posted on the official Project Gutenberg trademark symbol website, www.gutenberg.org, you must, at no additional cost, fee or expense to the user, provide a copy, a means of exporting a copy, or a means of obtaining a copy upon request, of the work in its original plain vanilla ASCII or other form. Any alternate format must include the full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license as specified in paragraph 1.e.1. 1.e.7. Do not charge a fee for access to, viewing, displaying, performing, copying or distributing any Project Gutenberg trademark symbol works unless you comply with paragraph 1.e.8 or 1.e.9. 1.e.8. You may charge a reasonable fee for copies of or providing access to or distributing Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works provided that you pay a royalty fee of 20% of the gross profits you derive from the use of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol works calculated using the method you already use to calculate your applicable taxes. The fee is owed to the owner of the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol trademark, but he has agreed to donate royalties under this paragraph to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. Royalty payments must be paid within 60 days following each date on which you prepare, or are legally required to prepare, your periodic tax returns. Royalty payments should be clearly marked as such and sent to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation at the address specified in Section 4. Information about donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. You provide a full refund of any money paid by a user who notifies you in writing, or by email, within 30 days of receipt that he does not agree to the terms of the full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license. You must require such a user to return or destroy all copies of the works possessed in a physical medium and discontinue all use of and all access to other copies of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol works. You provide, in accordance with paragraph 1.f.3, a full refund of any money paid for a work or a replacement copy, if a defect in the electronic work is discovered and reported to you within 90 days of receipt of the work. You comply with all other terms of this agreement for free distribution of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol works. 1.e.9. If you wish to charge a fee or distribute a Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work or group of works on different terms than are set forth in this agreement, you must obtain permission in writing from the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the manager of the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol trademark. Contact the Foundation as set forth in Section 3 below. 1.f1.f.1. Project Gutenberg volunteers and employees expend considerable effort to identify, do copyright research on, transcribe and proofread works not protected by U.S. copyright law in creating the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol collection. Despite these efforts, Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works, and the medium on which they may be stored, may contain defects such as, but not limited to, incomplete, inaccurate or corrupt transcription.